Hey, so in this video, it's going to be a discussion about something I introed in the previous video talking about Captain Marvel. So I'll just give you a summary of it and then we'll get into the video, and some thoughts around it. So I had said with Captain Marvel being brought into the Marvel Cinematic Universe and being retconned into that whole thing, like they're going back and saying she was the one who established S.H.I.E.L.D. and things like that. She's been out in space being all powerful. Now she's going to come in with the Avengers, with them fighting Thanos, and she's going to come and play a part in ending the threat of Thanos and nullifying that threat. So she's being set up as a really powerful character. But in the comic books, she's never really been that popular. And I was thinking this could be one way to transition into the next phase of Marvel Comics. Marvel Cinematic Universe has now gotten back the rights for X-Men. So you could introduce X-Men into this by having Rogue come in and take her powers. Although Brie Larson supposedly signed up for a whole lot of films, but depending on how this has actually been accepted or received by the fans, you could pivot to this way. Have X-Men come in, have Rogue take her powers, and in that way you're kind of saying, okay, in this phase 2 of this whole Marvel Cinematic Universe, this person from phase 1 was actually like universal level power, but then now you just have somebody who's part of a team, she comes in and takes these powers, and she has the powers, and then you kind of throw in this kind of crossover thing at the start. Instead of building up, you can even have like a crossover at the early launch that kind of fractions the universe with people like Scarlet Witch or people like Franklin Richards, who's the son of the Fantastic Four's Reed and Sue Richards. You could have them use their powers. Or you could have Onslaught come in, who was an amalgam of Professor Xavier and Magneto, and have some of these characters use their reality altering powers to now kind of explain why you're going to reintroduce a lot of these characters, a new Iron Man, a new Captain America, and such, because now there's all these different universes. So that's just a way I think they can treat with this. And then now in this video, I'm going to be discussing kind of the structure of how I think something like this could work. Let me know what you guys think. Okay, so I'd take a little pause there. Just thinking about this, let me try to put it in a more concise way. And I think this might be being done already. I haven't really been studying what's happening, but I've seen some things here and there where it's like, okay, these people, Disney starting their streaming thing. I've heard that certain teams working on certain projects, certain actors are being moved. I heard something that this was just a rumor that Elizabeth Olsen, who plays Scarlet Witch, may have been upset because she was being relegated to working on some TV show or some made for the Disney streaming service, a couple of shows there, instead of being the main attraction of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Because the Scarlet Witch, again, she could be used to be part of people, because she did like the No More Mutants story where she actually said this No More Mutants and then completely changed the world. So she has reality altering powers. So you get people like her, you get people like Franklin Richards, and then you can knock off this whole multiverse thing very easily, yet it's still attached. So I'm thinking this. You have the tentpole films that the big studios understand, we're making one of these a year, or we're making 2 or 3 of these in each quarter, but we know ahead of time, like Black Panther is coming out this time, it's going to be in the big theaters, then 3 years later we're going to have the next Black Panther, or 2 years later, but you have that on a schedule. Now, all the other creative teams, let's say it's a cartoon doing something, that cartoon can just be like, okay, we're working on our separate story about what's happening in Wakanda or something, and then like when we know the Chadwick Boseman and the main people on this thing actually have to come in and film their movies, we already have our script, so he can come on and he can read his lines for the few episodes in the show where he's actually going to be key, or let's say he just reads the lines that he's using, that he's going to be in the few minutes he's in the show. Let's say you're just focusing on some kids in Wakanda who occasionally run into the Black Panther. So you have that kind of a separate thing. Now you have a TV show where it's like, okay, these people are, like there was this Damage Control comic book, which I thought was a pretty cool comic book. It's not necessarily, I don't know if it was in Marvel, but it was some group of people with powers who used to go to actual locations and clean up after what happens there. You know, because all these superheroes have these fights and there's a lot of destruction going on. Who cleans that up? You leave all that, like, you leave all the garbage there. Some people get hurt. You have to rebuild these things. So you can have now a separate storyline that's maybe like an HBO type of thing, or a Netflix type of thing, where this is a show done with a rotating cast of people. Because now in a show like this, depending on the site, depending on the location that you're working in, depending on the fight that's occurred, you might need different characters to actually be in there to actually clean up that thing. You might need different kind of powers. So you can have kind of it be a temp agency of sorts. You can have these people follow the lives of these people, so it's more like a procedural show. So you're seeing the day-to-day lives of these individuals that are working for this company. But now every time there is an actual Marvel film or something like that, some people from this show are actually called in and it's like, hey, you guys want to come to New York? Captain America or the She-Hulk just came in and she had this massive fight with what's called Gladiator or something who landed in from space in the She-Hulk 2022 film. And then you come in there and you shoot a couple of scenes. You use some scenes that were cut from the main film to show from the point of view of these shows, and you have like an entire episode or two where you kind of happening during the actual film, but then now you break off from there and then it's like, okay, we invited these two characters to come in because their special powers are helpful in controlling these things, and now you do the different kind of back and forths of the collecting the technology of how to use that technology to go in, and the technology that Gladiator brought from space, now that technology has been recovered during the fight scene, and then now what's happening with that technology, how is it being flipped over into the thing. Then now you can bring in someone like a character like Forge, who was from the X-Men, who had this amazing ability to create any kind of technology, so he can kind of go in there and he can be some what's it called, he can be a consultant and kind of go in there and be like, okay, this is what this technology does, and retcon it back in. Then maybe with that one you can go to the actual X-Men Academy or place, and then you can introduce a few mutants that are secondary or characters, and then these secondary characters, if they're popular enough in the show, you can have some actual creative teams come up and some up-and-coming artists. It's like, oh, this is a really cool character that I maybe have a good story for, maybe I've just done this fan fiction for, and then now that fan fiction is popular enough, then Marvel thinks like, okay, we can invest with these people and have this person run with this side character that was introduced in this long kind of chain. Now with all this kind of things, I support having this stuff be open source, these creative things. Find out some new profit sharing type of thing where you don't have to invest so much into it, yet you also don't refuse other people from using that content. And this is in part due to how I've experienced, how I've taken in content. I'm going to admit here, I don't know if this makes me legally something, but anyway, I've used some torrents and these scantillation sites where people take this information and then they go in there, and I know it takes away money from the actual creatives, but I think there's ways to get more profit sharing. And when I end up creating my material and putting it out there, I'm looking at ways to have more where it's that kind of crowdfunding thing, where it's like, I'm creating this. If you guys like what I'm doing, can you please invest in me? And I also want to find ways to create better platforms, because from my experience with some of these creatives, with the stories they want to tell, they really enjoy that process of creating the story. And this is not just the exposure thing. Creating the story, they might have these massive demands where they want to be driving around in this $19 million Bugatti that was just sold and things like that, but they actually just want to make a living and be able to support themselves, have a family, work on these projects, and it can be done, I think, in a more feasible way, using the technology that we have today, using the markets in different kind of ways, finding different ways of profit sharing, where it's not like, oh, we have this identity, we have this IP, we have this intellectual property, and we're not going to let anyone use anything with other Hulk material, so anyway, so finding ways to kind of spread the creative ability out there. You're giving more people access to the creatives. The cost of actually creating these things is a lot less prohibitive. I think if you spread it out in this way, you're getting free advertising from having all these other people create material with the characters that you created. And with this whole creativity ability, people wanting to create content, my experience from seeing things in manga and Marvel and manga and anime is I have reread some manga over and over again. There are a lot of people who will be reading manga and really enjoy the manga, and they're like, I can't wait to see this animated. There's clips online of millions and millions of viewers of people just watching different fight scenes in the manga, animes over and over and over and over again. There's people going in there who make entire livings just talking about what happened in the previous manga and what's probably going to happen in the next one. Week by week, people are just giving these people views because this content, these are the same storylines. This whole idea that, oh, this idea of the Hulk, this idea of Iron Man, this idea of XYZ needs to be in this particular way, needs to be owned by these characters and displayed in this particular way, is bunk. Because these are archetypes, these are storylines that have been told since we've been telling stories, that have been told in different ways. And I think for me, that's maybe one positive thing that I say would have come out from Black Panther, is I think it's opened up a lot of people to the awareness that, yes, in Africa, there's going to be, I think, with all the tribes, with all the different dark continent kind of ideas and things like that, there's going to be a lot of new storylines, or at least new takes on the same old archetypes, because we're all humans and there's certain archetypes that are there, but I think it showed maybe some profitability, some actual ability to sell certain storylines that are based off of the same general archetypes, but the same Messiah types, the same Mother Earth type of storylines, but now with different kind of characters. So it's like different skins. I mean, it's kind of a pun in there, different skins with the skin colors. But no, it's like how sometimes you'll take a character, like, what's a good example? You see this even with Marvel and DC. There's certain characters like Aquaman and Namor. They're pretty much the same character, but it's one is done by Marvel, one is done by DC. There's things like that. I think like Lobo and somebody. I don't know. So you see that happening with different characters, where it's like, okay, it's essentially the same character, but we're just going to change their name and change a bit about the background, and then we're still going to treat the character, but we're still going to tell different stories with these characters. So I think the people who can come up with these kind of archetypes and ideas, let them come up with them, let other people do it, have more access to people using that creative material. You'll still be able to come up with, I think, more creativity. And I think, from my experience, the fans and the support, they value the people who come up with these initial ideas. They don't just think like, oh, you came up with this idea and now this other person has taken it and done something, so we don't really care about you. I think they still reward the people. And it's also not as easy as people think to just go out there and create something brand new. So I think if you have that ability, there's a reason some people like Stan Lee have created so many different kind of people, so many different kind of content. But then now if you don't have that system where you have to own the copyright, or you have to own the IP to this thing and severely limit anybody else from using it, then I think that lessens the kind of effect of, if you don't have that, you can increase ways to make that thing profitable, have that thing continue, have that thing grow in a natural kind of way. One last thing I'm going to say here is just tying this back out to this whole complaints about what's happening with these things. I think there is that temptation where someone's like, look, I own this IP. When it comes to Star Wars, this is one thing. I'm never really going to be upset to the amount that I see some people being upset with Disney or with the direction Star Wars has gone in. Because first of all, I think the initial trilogy, the first trilogy was cool. Like the Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. But the prequels, I thought they were kind of bunk. They looked cool, but then the storylines already dipped. They were mocked. There were some really terrible things about that. That was already showing a slip, in my opinion. Now, you come to these current ones, which are more feminist, but that's, again, just more towards the times. And people are now like, this is horrible, this is the end of it, Rose Tico, these people. And yes, it has shown a further decline, but this is because I think you have that storyline where it's like, okay, the only canon thing is owned by these particular people, and there's gatekeepers to this. And that gatekeeper, in part, was George Lucas. What if George Lucas, instead of, after he made his millions, now that doesn't even matter, even if he didn't make your millions, but you just have enough, he wasn't really going to worry about his life. He had enough to pass on to his kids. He was known as the person who created Star Wars and things like this. What if instead of him going and selling this to Disney for $4 billion, no matter the agreement, if he says, oh, they agreed to do this and this and now they're violating it, he sold out anyway. What if he just made it open source and said, okay, all the fan creations can be canon. Anyone can create material for this and just be completely live, instead of selling this to a corporation that, with the whole environment of corporatism, with the government giving the protection where it's saying, okay, now you're going to give you protection. If somebody else is doing this, we can sue them and then we can put them in our government jails and things like this, or we can fine them, things like that. So if you just have a thing where he's just like, look, this is open source. Anyone can create this stuff. If you want something to be canon, it's canon. Like if somebody really had some really cool fan fiction, some really cool character in there, and then they thought, wow, this character was amazing, but then now like Disney's come out and it said like all this stuff's not canon. Oh, there's this really cool storyline that George Lucas had said was canon, and then now Disney is coming and said it's not canon. Why are you letting somebody else decide what's canon for your own idea and relationship of Star Wars? So anyway, that's just the last thing I was saying. I think there is that temptation when you have this kind of system set up. So yes, there is something in the system that is going to limit the creativity, and I think with that limitation, it creates situations where once a company, once an idea is raised in popularity, that whole massive company kind of falls towards that thing, and it could be a situation where it's a crippling wound, where if you had more flexibility, if you had more freedom, where it's like this is not the main storyline of this, then it's a lot harder. You can have a few people, part of the storyline kind of go out and try something new, try to reach out to feminists and things like that. Or you could have an entire part where it's like, look, we are taking these characters and we have this, like it happens in fan fiction already, where they're like, look, we are working on this character, and in our character, these two characters are in a boys' love. In boys' love is like some gay relationship. They have this whole thing and we're focusing on this entire thing, and that's all it is. And then instead of them saying we have to shoehorn this into the main storyline because the main storyline is XYZ, you have a thing where different people can try different storylines and they can run with those things, run with that content, and that content is as real, quote unquote, as any other content, and you get to choose what you want. People have more selection, people have more freedom in that sense. Let me know what you think about that. Goodbye. Okay, thanks for watching. Going to go back to what I was talking about at the start, just some more thoughts on what can be done if that actually happens. I mean, if I had control of Sony, Marvel, and things like that, this is what I'd do with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I'd reintroduce the X-Men in that kind of way. And this way you've kind of shown that, look, yes, Captain Marvel was this all-powerful character, one of the most powerful characters in this first phase of Avengers, and now you're coming in and you're introducing this character who's just a part of a team, as I said, and now she's taking over. So it sets a power level for these characters, like, yes, nobody's untouchable in this kind of sense. But then you can also add the Onslaught type of storyline, or the Marvel Cinematic Universe is already based off of, what's it called? It's mostly based off the Ultimates universe, and the Ultimates universe was a universe I created in the comic books after Reed Richards and Sue Richards' son, Franklin Richards, and that's the Fantastic Four people, he has reality-altering powers. And I think this was during the Onslaught thing. I could be wrong. I think it was during the Onslaught thing, and Onslaught was some kind of amalgam of Magneto and Professor Xavier's powers, and he was just some big massive crossover that created, okay, a big massive crossover. Pretty much all the comic books were involved in it, all the characters from the different places were involved in it. Then you got to the point where Franklin used his powers to create this pocket universe in this ball that he was carrying, and that was the Ultimates universe, and that enabled them to kind of retell, revamp, kind of update a lot of these characters to fit closer into the world that we have today. You know, it was more like tactical uniforms. The politics involved in it were more realistic with global concerns and things like that. I think it was just a more gritty. I really enjoyed what they did with the Ultimates universe. So anyway, you can bring in something like Onslaught. The Fantastic Four people can be brought in. So that storyline can kind of be retconned into this whole Marvel universe, Marvel Cinematic Universe. And then after you get to that point where you say, okay, now this character, Franklin Richards, or some other character has broken these worlds up into these different universes and things like that. Now you can have a thing where it's like separate kind of dimensions. Now you can have different creative teams kind of handle these things. You can say, okay, we're breaking off some characters to be PG cartoons and made for and TV and streaming kind of things where it's just for general audiences. And you can have the same actors who are across the board. Some characters you can have different actors, because you can just say, in this universe, Spider-Man's character, like Into the Spider-Verse, didn't watch any of the Spider-Man films, not because I don't dislike what they've done with the character. The recent actor, I forget his name, the British chap, I forget his actual name, but I really liked the portrayal. I think this might have been the best portrayal that I've seen. It harkens back to the whole younger thing. Tobey Maguire did a weird thing. I don't really like what Andrew Garfield did with it. I really liked what the current Spider-Man did in the Civil War films and in the latest Avenger film. So, coming back to it, didn't watch those, but then Tom Holland. Is his name Tom Holland? I think it's Tom Holland. I might be mixing this up with the guy who did that one kind of James Bondy type thing where they're dressing up. Anyway, coming back to the thing. So you can have a thing now when you break off and you say, okay, in certain universes, Doctor Strange or Hulk is a black guy or is a woman or anything. You can have these things where you break it off in this reality, but then because it happened at this breakup in the main cinematic universe, everything can kind of be canon, yet can be you can completely retcon and you can have different creative teams handling these things, working on these kind of things. And I was thinking of this system where you have the investment that you take from making these major films. You have these separate teams working on things, and then you can have like the team that's doing something for just the regular TV show. Find some way to do some kind of contract, some profit sharing thing, where these smaller teams are doing the streaming, that are doing the things like that. When you're actually shooting the major films, you can have them use some of the sets. You can have them use some of the assets that you create and you invest into that. That way you're not doubling up where you're like, okay, this is a completely unique thing. This has to be handled separately, and then this has to be handled by these other people. So thanks a lot for listening. That was it. I was a bit repetitive. Some things I might have said over and over again. It was just a rant, stream of thought things of some things I've been thinking about for some time. If any of this is happening, let me know in the comment section. If you guys have other ideas or if you think some of these things just wouldn't work because of XYZ, let me know in the comment section as well. Have you watched Captain Marvel? Or do you plan on watching Captain Marvel? What do you think is going to happen in the future if it's none of the stuff I've talked about? What would your hopes and plans be for the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Or are you finally checking out and moving on to other things and you don't really want to watch comic book movies anymore because like some of us just stopped reading comic books, some people are just going to grow out of certain genres. Well anyway, like, share, and subscribe. That's it for this video. Till next time, goodbye.